Hi there, welcome to this session, Understand and Implement Azure API Management. Now, APIs, as you all know, provide you with a mechanism that enables two or more separate software components to communicate with each other using a set of definitions and protocols. And these software components might be built on different technology platforms. Maybe one is on Java, the other one on .NET, and say what. But since they are based on standards, APIs provide the information or perform the functionality that is intended. APIs may provide complete separation of concern by providing only a part of the overall functionality and acts as an individual contributor. And in this session, we will talk about Azure API Management, which is a PaaS service and provides a way to create and manage consistent modern API gateways for existing backend services. And these backend services are nothing but the APIs that we were just discussing. Don't worry if it did not make sense to you for now. I will explain you through examples later in this course. Hi, my name is Neeraj Kumar. I'm a cloud advocate, architect and author, and I will be your instructor for this course. Stay tuned. This is going to be a two-part session. So let's understand what we are going to cover in each of these sessions. In the first part, we will first try to understand what Azure API Management is, followed by the key terminologies, and we need to get familiarized with them. This is followed by API Management Components, and finally, in the first part, we will see how to configure Azure API Management Service. In the second part of the session, we will try to publish and add APIs to Azure API Management Service, which will be followed by security considerations for APIs, and then we'll try to understand APIM features, SKUs, and pricing, followed by the policies in Azure API Management. So there is a lot to cover. Let's get started. By definition, Azure API Management is a hybrid multi-cloud management platform for APIs across all environments. As a platform as a service, API Management supports the complete API lifecycle. It's a reliable, secure, and scalable way to publish, consume, and manage APIs running on Microsoft Azure platform. It provides you with all the essential tools needed for an end-to-end management of APIs, ensuring that you get the optimal performance, track usage, enforce policies, authentication, and much more, which we'll be seeing later in the course. In essence, the Azure API Management is primarily used to provide a central interface to create, provision, and manage API for the web and cloud applications and services. Basically, it provides a facade for the backend APIs. It ensures that you get optimal performance of the APIs, tracks and enforces usage, authentication, and much more. And how do you get the optimal performance? Because it caches the response, and that is how you get the improved performance. With APIM, you can monitor the health of the APIs, identify errors, configure throttling, rate limits, and much more on each of the API. Creating and managing roles is another feature, and defining end-to-end API usage policies. It helps in consolidating APIs into products and manage thousands of APIs across multiple platforms. It also provides a developer portal to help the developers choose and consume the APIs. And finally, it also provides insight into the utilization of each of the APIs. Now that we know what Azure API Management Service is, let us try to understand some key terminologies of Azure APIM. So the first one is backend API. We then have the frontend API, the product, API operations, followed by version, revision, policy, and developer portal. So let's try to understand them one at a time. The first one is the backend API. So it says that it is a service most commonly HTTP based that implements an API and its operations. It means that it is the core thing. That is what the operation that is intended. So it acts as the backend API, and the front-end API, which is the second one, is the facade. That's the URL that is given to the consumer. So that is how the API management acts as a mediation layer over the backend APIs. And the front-end API URL is the one that is given to the consumers. We then have a product. Now it says a product is a bundle of front-end APIs that can be made available to a specified group of API consumers. Now, when you have multiple APIs and you want to bundle it, you want to consolidate everything into one single product, you can do that via this option. And within the developer portal, you get this option to select all the APIs that you want to group into a particular product. We then have the API operations. Now, a front-end API in API management can define multiple operations. And like we have the get, put, post, and delete. So an operation actually is a combination of an HTTP verb and the URL template uniquely resolvable within the front-end API. Now, you see that we have two terminologies. One is the version, the other one is revision. You might think that both the same thing, right? But no. Here, in this case of Azure API Management, there is definitely some difference. So I'll let you know now. Versions allow you to present group of related APIs to your developers. So you can group them and present it to your developers for use. And you can use the versions to handle breaking changes in your API safely. Clients can choose to use your new API version when they are ready, while the existing clients can continue to use the older version. Whereas when we talk about the revisions, they allow you to make changes to your APIs in a controlled and safe way. When you want to make changes, you create new revisions, you can edit and test the APIs without disturbing your API consumers. When you are ready, you can then make your revision current, and at the same time, you can post an entry into the new change log and keep your API consumers up to date of what has changed. In other words, a revision can be considered as a copy of an existing API version, and you can make the changes to it without impacting the API consumers, as I already told you, and then you can swap with the current version that you had taken for the revision. So that is the differences between version and revision. Then we have the policy. A policy basically is a set of rules that you wish to apply on top of any particular individual API, a group of APIs, or even the overall product which comprises of multiple different APIs. By default, Azure provides 50 built-in policies, but other than that, you can create your own policies as well. And finally, we have the developer portal. And this developer portal, basically it's a API management component, and it is open for the developers to pick and choose the type of APIs that they want to consume and create their own product. Do not worry if you did not understand a few of these terminologies at all. We will look into it when we are working on the lab, and then it will be more clear to you. Back to our presentation. So there are three major components for the API management. When you configure or when you create a new instance of API management services, there are three major components. The first one is the API gateway. So all the requests from the client application first reaches the API gateway, which then forwards them to the respective backend services, that is the backend APIs. The API gateway acts as a facade to the backend services, allowing API providers to abstract API implementations and evolve backend architecture without impacting API consumers. The gateway enables consistent configuration of routing, security, throttling, caching, and observability. We then have the management plane. API providers interact with the services through the management plane, which provides full access to the API management service capabilities using Azure tools, including the Azure portal, and you can also use the Azure PowerShell as well as the Azure CLI. The third one is the developer portal. API providers can customize the look and feel of the developer portal by adding custom content, customizing styles, and adding their own branding. And the app developers can use the open source developer portal to discover the APIs. What they can do is they can group those APIs into products, onboard them to use them, and learn how to consume them in the applications. Let's try to understand each of these components in a little more detail. Okay? So the first one is the API gateway. Specifically, the gateway acts as a facade, as I've already told you multiple times, for the backend services, and it accepts the API calls and then it routes them to the appropriate backend APIs. What it also does is it verifies the API keys and other credentials such as the JSON Web Token, which is the JWT tokens, and the certificates presented with the requests for authentication purposes. With the API gateway, you can enforce policies, the usage quotas, and the rate limits. And optionally, you can transform the requests and the responses as specified in the policy statement. If you have configured the caching, then it caches the responses, and that improves the response latency and minimizes the load on the backend services. And finally, it also emits logs, metrics, and traces which can be used for monitoring, reporting, and troubleshooting purposes. We then have the management plane. Now, you can use the management plane to provision and configure the API management service settings. You can define and import schemas that are the API schemas from a wide range of sources. It can be Open API specifications, it can be Azure Compute Services or a WebSocket or a GraphQL backend. You can package API into products. So as I already told you, you have the option to select from multiple different APIs that are already present as backend APIs, and you can package them into products. You can also set up policies like quotas or transformations on the APIs. You can also get insights from the analytics that is gathered from the management plane. And finally, you can also manage users, roles, and permissions. Last but not the least, we have the developer portal. Using the developer portal, developers can read the API documentation for all the APIs that are built using the Open API specification. What can also be done is you can call an API via the interactive console and you can test and see the results. You can create an account and subscribe to get the API keys for the API usage. You can access the analytics of your own usage, and also you can download the API definitions and manage the API keys as well. It is now time to get our hands dirty and perform our lab. So here I am on my Azure portal and I will demonstrate to you how to provision the Azure API Management service. So although I have this icon here on my homepage, but what you can do is you can go to the search bar and search for API Management. And here it's the first option, API Management Services. I will click on it. And once there, I will click on Create. But before that, let me tell you that this service takes a lot of time for the deployment. So I have already created this and I'll show you all the settings that I have already done. But just for your sake, what I'll do is I'll click on Create and show you how it is provisioned. So on the Install API Management Gateway page, Under the Basics tab, you have to choose subscription, the resource group, I already have it. For the region, I'll choose East US 2. You can choose the one that is closer to you. And then I need to give the resource name. So I will give it a name of ATCSL APIM Demo 1. For the workspace name, I'll give it a name of ATCSL APIM Demo. And for the administrator email, it's the one which will be receiving the alerts and notifications. So for this, I'm going to give my email address. Now that this is done, I need to choose the pricing tier. And here I have different options. So the first one is developer, where there is no SLA. Then we have the basic, standard, premium, and consumption. And here is the link on your screen that you can refer for looking at all the features that are available for the different tiers that are available for Azure API Management Service. But for now, for the sake of the demonstration, I'll be choosing developer. And here under the developer pricing tier, I'll not get the option for scaling out, but that's fine. So I'll choose developers, no SLA, and then I'll click on next, monitoring. Here, I can click on the application insights checkbox to check this up, and you will get all the application insights for your Azure APIM. For the purpose of the demo, I will leave it as it is, and I'll click on next, scale. And this is what I was talking about when choosing the pricing tier, that for the developer option, you do not get this option for scale units because they're not supported for the developer and consumption tiers. So we'll let it remain as it is and click on next, managed identity. So here I have the option to create the system assigned managed identity. If I click on it, it will create a system assigned managed identity. For other services like Azure Automation, and there are other services where you get the option to also assign the user assigned managed identity and system assigned managed identity as well. But here in this case, you will see the option just for the system assigned managed identity. You can do it from here, or you can do it after the service has been provisioned. So what I'll do is, let me go ahead and check this box and then click on next, virtual network. Now here I have three different options for the connectivity type. One is none, the second one is virtual network, and then the private endpoint. For the private endpoint, what it does is it assigns one private IP address from one of the subnets within the virtual network that you have already provisioned. What it will do is it will block all the outbound calls, but what it will also do is it will block all the access from the public internet, and you can only access the resources when you are connected either via the VPN or the express route. Now, for the virtual network option, if I choose that, it will just bring this service within the virtual network. And although you can access this APIM from the public internet, but still this will bring the service within the virtual network. So I'll let remain the connectivity type as none and then click on protocol settings. Now here are certain security options for Cypher, client-side protocols, client-side transport security, and backend-side transport security. So for the client-side protocol, I can click and choose for HTTP/2, and for the client-side transport security, I can choose between TLS 1.1 and 1.0 and SSL 3.0 as well. For the backend side transport security, which is the communication between the front-end APIs and the backend APIs, the communication that can happen with TLS 1.1 or 1.0 or the SSL certificate version 3.0. I let it remain as it is, and then I have the option to provide the tags, and then I can click on review and create. And after all the settings have been validated, I can click on create to start provisioning the Azure API Management Gateway services. So since I already have it created, I'll just click on cancel from here, and I will take you to the settings that I already have for my existing API management services. So I'll click on it. And I'll click on this arrow to give more space and for more visibility. And here you can see the status as online. It's under the resource group that I've already created, and it has a developer portal. I told you earlier during my presentation that when you deploy the Azure API Management service, it will create a developer portal as well. Now, here is the developer portal URL. Other than that, you have the gateway URL, and it's under the East US 2 location. Now, on the left hand side, if I scroll down, you will see APIs. And here is the real meat and potatoes for the API management services. So what I can do is I can click on APIs. And for now, you will see that you have the option to create new APIs as well. So you can define a new API using HTTP or the WebSocket, GraphQL or synthetic GraphQL. If you want to create it from a definition, you can use WSDL or the OpenAPI specification part. Other than that, you can use Logic app or the function app along with the app services and the container app as well. So all these options are there for you to create your new APIs. And apart from that, you also get an Echo API already provisioned for you. So this is by default provisioned by Microsoft when you provision the API management service. So I'll click on it. And out here, you will see all the methods that are available. So you have the post, you have the put, you have the delete along with the get options. Now, further on to the right, you will see the complete architecture. You have the front end, then you have the inbound and the outbound processing as well as the backend. And backend is for the backend APIs. These are the APIs which actually performs the operation. The inbound processing is when the request comes in from the front-end API, which is provisioned when you are creating the API management service, and it takes the request from the front-end APIs. You can apply the policies here, and then it sends the request to the backend APIs. And then the backend APIs, they process the request and send the response back via the outbound processing. And here also you can apply the policies and the rules. And the rules and policies can be applied on the backend APIs directly. Once that is done, the result is sent back to the front-end APIs and back to the consumer. Other than that, for all the APIs that are provisioned, you get different options on the top. So you have the settings where you get to see the name of the API, which is the Echo API, the name. If you want, you can provide the description, the web service URL, and then the URL scheme, that it is a HTTP or HTTPS or both HTTP and HTTPS. So it depends on your requirement. Other than that, there is a API URL suffix. We'll see the use of this API URL suffix when we are actually working with the APIs. So using this API URL suffix, there is a base URL that gets created. So for our case, it is https://APIM.azure-api.net/echo. In essence, the base URL is the combination of the gateway URL as well as the API URL suffix. Here, the gateway URL is https APIM Azure API.net, and then we have the API URL suffix, which is echo. So that makes the base URL. If you want, you can provide the tags, and then we have the products. Here we see that there are two products mentioned. One is the starter and other one is the unlimited. So this Echo API is the part of these two products. We can have other products as well. So one API can be part of different products. We also have the gateways. So for now, it's the managed gateway. And if I scroll down, it says the subscription required is checked. meaning that any request coming for the Echo API require the API key, and for that they need the subscription, and that API key needs to be provided with the request. Apart from that, we also have security. So if you want the user authorization and authentication, you can go ahead and check OAuth 2.0 or OpenID Connect, and that will authorize all the requests coming for any of the methods for Echo API. Then we also have the diagnostic logs. As of now, it is not checked, but you can check it for application insights. We also have Azure Monitor and local. Other than that, if you notice, we have the test tab as well. And using this test tab, you can test all the methods. You don't need a Postman to install and use that for testing purposes. You can directly test it from here. So what you can do is you can directly click on any of the methods. And once that is loaded, what you can do is you can scroll down. If there are any parameters or something, you can choose that, and then you can click on send. So once that is done, it will bring back the result saying 200 OK. So this method is working properly. And if you scroll down a little, it will give us the response back, like vehicle type as train, maximum speed is 125, the average speed is 90, as well as the speed unit, which is miles per hour. So that is how you can test the APIs. Other than that, you have revisions as well. So we had discussed about revisions and versions. You can create a separate revision for your API. And then you have the change log. And this change log will keep track of all the revisions that you had done. Other than that, for the current revision, it shows here. If there are multiple revisions, you can click on it and it will show the different ones that are available, and you can choose from the drop down. For now, there is just one revision, and we'll be working with revisions and versions later in the course. So that is it from the API side. Now coming to the products. As of now, there are two different products. The first one is a starter and the other one is unlimited. So if I click on it, it will take me to the details of this particular product, and this product, as I already told you, may have one or more APIs. So a product is created and the developers can perform their testing or consume the complete product of different APIs. So if I click on APIs here, it will show me the Echo API that was already there, and you can see the name here as Echo API. I'll go back here and then again unlimited, I'll click on it, and here also if I click on the APIs, it will show me the same Echo API here. I'll go back, and on the products page I can click on add, and once I'm there I can add product. I'll have to give the display name, the ID, and we can also give the description. Once that is done, I can click on the checkbox for published so that the product is published as soon as we create that. We also have the requires subscription checkbox. And why it is there? Because any request coming in for this particular product requires the API key. If the API key is not needed, then we can uncheck this. Other than that, we have the requires approval, and that is where any consumer subscribing to this particular product will need to go through the approval process, and the approval needs to be given by the administrator. There are other details like subscription count limit and legal terms. If you want, you can give it. One more thing, you can add the APIs also directly from here by clicking on the plus button below APIs. If I click on the plus sign, it will give me the drop down. I can scroll down and here it will show me the Echo API that I can select. But since this product already has the Echo API, I'll not do anything. So this is how you add the APIs to the product, and finally you add the product. So I'll click on cancel and I'll go back. Other than that, we have the subscriptions. And this subscription, mind you, is entirely different than the subscription we have for the overall Azure services. And from here, I can click on add subscription, give it a name, give a display name if you want, and then we can click on check. We can check on allow tracing for the tracing of the API usage. And other than that, we have the scope. So it can be for all the APIs or for a particular API or a product. So what I can do is I can select product from the drop down, and then I can choose the product if I want. And I have two options. One is the starter, the other one is unlimited. I'll click on starter, and then from the user, I can choose from all the available user. It can be an administrator or any other group that I create. And once chosen, I can provide that group or a user the access permissions for this particular product. Once that is done, we can click on create to create a subscription. So that is how a new subscription will be created, and you will get the primary and the secondary key for the particular product or the service with the status as active, and you will also get the owner and all the settings that you had provided within the add subscription option. Now let's look at the backends. So what backend does is it lets you manage the resources representing backend services of your APIs. So what you can do, you can reference backend resources from the set backend service policy. So from here, you can click on add, and you have the option to create the backend. You provide the name, and then you need to provide the type of backend service. It can be a custom URL, an Azure resource, or service fabric. Once that is done, you have the option to provide the authorization credentials. Those authorization credentials can go as a part of the header or a query string or even the client certificate. Once that is done, you can click on create and the backend will be provisioned for you. And then we have the API tags that you can create for each individual APIs. You can click on add, and then you can have the display name and the name given. So once the tag has been created, you can assign those tags to your APIs. So now we'll scroll down, and under the developer portal, you have different options. You have the option for portal preview, portal settings, and users, groups, identities, delegation. So this is what I was explaining earlier, that from here you can have the users or the groups created and then give those users permissions on the APIs. Other than that, for securing your APIs or the products, you can use OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect. Further scrolling down, under monitoring, we have analytics, which gathers all the information and all the analysis about the API usage and other details. We have the application insights for each individual APIs. Then we have the alerts, metrics, diagnostic settings. We can set the alerts and notification, and the administrator will receive those alerts. Other than that, there are metrics on the usage, about the peak time and other details about how it is being used and who is using that. So all those details are captured here. Other than that, we have the logs and the workbooks as well. Now from here, under deployment infrastructure, we have the pricing tier. So as of now, we have the developer pricing tier with no SLA. If you want, you can go ahead and change the pricing tier to basic, standard, or premium. And then I'll click on locations. So as of now, it shows me that I'm in the East US 2. That's my primary region. And I cannot add any more locations because I have the developer pricing tier, which does not allow adding more regions or more locations. We then have scale out. For a scale out as well, I'll not get much options because it is not available for this particular pricing tier, which is the developer pricing tier. Other than that, we have the gateways, and you can click on add to create the API gateways from here. You can give the name, the location, and then you can click on the plus sign under APIs to add the APIs. For now, I'll click on cancel, and then we have the external cache. So you can have the external cache added so that you can have the improved performance and it reduces the latency of the response. For now, we will leave it as it is. And then we have the custom domains. Now, this custom domain can be used for your product or for the complete API management service, and you can have the custom domain, and the consumers will have to use that custom domain in order to consume your APIs. Other than that, we have the network, and this is what we saw during the configuration of the API management service, where I told you that you can choose between none, external and internal. So internal is the private endpoints. Other than that, we have external, which is within the virtual network, but still you can access it from the public internet. And then we have none. Going on next, we have notifications, and you can set the alert notification for any kind of new subscription request or new subscriptions. If there are application gallery requests or any other kind of request, you can set those notifications using this. We have certain notification templates as well, which are already provided. And then you have the management API that can be used to manage the API settings. So there are two tabs. One is the direct management API. The other one is management API settings. You can enable the management REST API, and then you have the credentials and the access tokens and other details which you can see from here, along with the primary and the secondary key. So that is it, I think, for this part of the demo. I'll go through each of these sections and each of these options later in the course when I'm explaining in depth how this API management service actually works. So this brings us to the end of the first part of the Azure API Management series. I hope you liked the video, and in case you did, just hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you in the second part of the Azure API Management series, where we will be covering in detail how to add the APIs and other security features, as well as other features, SKUs, pricing, and the policies that can be implemented. See you soon.